Hello and welcome to Tagat, everyone. This is the program in which we speak with people with good insights into issues of interest. The issue that has dominated discourses in Ethiopia and Eritrea is port access, following Abiy Ahmed's presentation, where he said Ethiopia must acquire a port access to get out of the geographic prison. Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti have all rejected Abiy's remarks, but a heated debate still rumbles on in Ethiopia and Eritrea nonetheless. The Economist said yesterday, citing diplomats and government officials, that Abiy has always wanted to secure a Red Sea harbor. How? Some people fear that Ethiopia might be planning to launch a military offensive against Eritrea. Whether that will come to pass or not, what is undeniable is that the relationship between Abiy and Isaias has broken down. How and why did that happen? To help us make sense of these issues, I have invited Martin Plaut on. Martin is a veteran journalist who focuses on the Horn of Africa. He has recently written a book with Dr. Sarah Vaughan titled Understanding Ethiopia's Tigray War. In the book, he writes about the pre-Tigray War agreements between Abiy and Isaias. He will tell us why those agreements, some of them never made public, failed to materialize. Welcome to Tagat, Martin.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
It's my pleasure. So when Abiy gave that presentation, Martin, did that come as a surprise to you, or was it something that you had always known was coming?
No, of course it was a surprise. I was really astonished that he would make these claims. But at one level, it's not surprising in this sense that he is somebody who, as I understand it, he's an evangelical Christian who believes that he's advised by God, and that he's outside of the normal, shall we say, scope of political life, which I suppose in Ethiopia would be advised that people are either from a tradition of the Coptic Church or Muslim faith, and they don't really see themselves as having this kind of direct relationship with the Almighty. And so, you know, it's been one of the things that has marked his tenure in office, have been these shall we say, dramatic decisions, which he says are inspired to take action. So in that sense, you know, the fact that he has taken really dramatic steps, and that this is one of them, is not that surprising, although the specifics certainly were.
What about the reaction that he got from Eritrea? I think the reaction from Eritrea was a dismissal of what he said. I think they said that they were not interested in that sort of discourse, and he got similar kinds of reactions from Djibouti and Somalia. Have there been anything from the reaction that surprised you, or was it the most reasonable reaction for them to have made?
Well, at one level, they were entirely reasonable, actually. I mean, for me to go around saying that a government led by President Isaias is reasonable is quite something, because I'm not his greatest fan, shall we say. But you know, we have to be a little bit cautious about all this. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, because I think that's a path that you can go down only too easily. Let us take the stand of the Eritreans and the Somalis and the others at face value, and not assume that this is some kind of convoluted plot by the president and the prime minister to sort of appear that there are difficulties where there aren't any. And let us assume also that the signs of discontent between, shall we say, Addis Ababa and Asmara, which have been building for some time. I mean, this is not new, that they are real and genuine, and that there really is a rift. Because if we don't assume that, then we are into a, shall we say, deep muddy pool of conspiracy theories, and it's just impossible to understand where we're going. So let's assume that it's accurate. I mean, of course, the other thing that one has to say in all of this is that in any kind of rational society, of course, Eritrea would give Ethiopia access to the sea. And if the Ethiopians wanted to reconstruct the navy that they once had in Massawa and Assab, why not? If they, within certain bounds, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen. It's a completely logical position. The problem is the way that it is posed, which, in a rather typically Abiy kind of way, he sort of was half, threatening and half being a sort of consensus kind of person. But to launch it in that kind of way is just crazy, I think.
Well, you said that Eritrea would have given Ethiopia access to the port, and indeed, in the book you write that, and I'm going to quote, the president, that is Isaias, told his advisors that it had a small and not very viable economy and a lengthy Red Sea coast, which Eritrea could not patrol on its own. He's reported to have suggested that some sort of union with Ethiopia might be possible, at least in terms of economic cooperation and maritime security. So these are agreements that would have been made in 2018. And I think one of the things that has surprised people is how fast the dynamic between Ethiopia and Eritrea has deteriorated. Why had that happened?
You see, I mean, that is why one always has to be a little bit skeptical about this idea of hostility. I mean, let us assume that the quotation that you read out, which I put in the book in good faith, I think it is true, and I still think it is true that they did hold this meeting, and that Isaias has always been sort of keen to be involved with Ethiopia. Let's not forget that he once said to, I think it was to Meles years and years and years ago, if we stopped supporting you, the Tigrayans would collapse, and Ethiopia would collapse with it. So, I mean, he has made these kind of, you're only there because we work with you. So this idea that he has not given up on Ethiopia, and that he wants to have a hold over Ethiopia, that he wants to have a relationship with Ethiopia, that he even might consider some kind of union, is not crazy. And so it isn't impossible that there could be this. And as I said, it's an entirely logical way forward. But and Isaias knows. I mean, I think that he genuinely does know that that Eritrea is not a particularly viable state. I mean, he has made a complete. I mean, to put a sort of British colloquialism, to a pig's ear out of the Eritrean economy. I mean, it's gone nowhere. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago, he does these huge, lengthy annual discussions with the nation. Well, discussions, he lectures them. And he said, what economy? We don't have an economy. And he's right. I mean, what he essentially has is a large number of people working in the peasant sector. He has a small, mining sector, and he has the state, which consists largely of the army. That's it. There isn't anything else. I mean, which is really pathetic, frankly, when, there were times when people thought in 1993 that Eritrea would become the Singapore of the Horn of Africa. I remember those kind of discussions, and they weren't entirely insane. But it's Ethiopia that has been shown the dynamism and the magnetism, and has actually grown extremely fast. Which is why the current situation, where the Ethiopian economy is in dire situation, is so worrying. I mean, because the one thing that the whole of the Horn of Africa needs is development, so that people can lead a decent life, and based on, frankly, quite a lot of the things that were laid in place by Meles and the Tigrayans when they ran the show.
Well, Martin, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is the asymmetry between Isaias and Abiy in terms of their inexperience. You say that Isaias is a very experienced, very scheming, and very calculating politician, whereas on the other hand, Abiy is a naive, and I think he used the word novice. And I think one of the things that people find very, very difficult to understand is why Abiy all of a sudden decided to distance himself when in fact he could have manipulated Abiy into any sort of arrangement where Isaias would emerge the net beneficiary in the arrangement. I think one obvious point, of course, of disagreement is the Pretoria Agreement, and this is a point that Kjetil Tronvoll mentioned when I interviewed him last time. He said that one of the source of anger for Isaias is that the TPLF hasn't been totally eliminated, and that remains a constant sore on Isaias' part. But that notwithstanding, I think that there is a lot to be gained for Isaias if he was to seriously engage Abiy. But why has Isaias all of a sudden decided to distance himself from Abiy? I think that's one thing that people having difficult time understanding.
Well, as Kjetil Tronvoll made clear, the war did not achieve what President Isaias wanted. I mean, he wanted the elimination of Tigray and the Tigrayans. That hasn't happened. So, in a sense, it's been a failure at huge cost, of course, to both sides. I mean, if you actually look at what has changed, I mean, it's hard to see anything that has changed apart from the impoverishment and the huge suffering, and which is just unbearable. I mean, even at this distance, sitting in London, I find it unbearable. I mean, what it must be like to be in Mekelle or in Asmara, with the bodies piling up. I can't imagine. I mean, it's just horrific. Sorry, I shouldn't go on about that, because I mean, hey, it's not for me to bear. That is suffering for the people to bear. But, I do think that Isaias is the most scheming person I have ever come across. I mean, I did meet him in the 1980s. I interviewed him because I went into the field. I went in with the EPLF on 2 occasions, once for the British Labour Party, officially. I mean, I think the only occasion when the British Labour Party ever sent a delegation to Eritrea. And secondly, when I was working for the BBC and reporting on what was going on, and I met him on both occasions, and he was the coldest, most calculating person I ever came across. I mean, the only person who comes close is Paul Kagame, another man who is capable of, turning you to a block of ice with one stare. Again, a very clever person, but utterly ruthless. And I'm afraid these the people who have such substantial holds over their countries and have ruled them and ruined them in some ways for many years. So that is the person that Isaias is, and he will go on scheming to the end of his days. I mean, the one thing that we can see now is his relationship with the Amhara and with the Fano, and I mean, of course, I only hear bits and pieces, but you can sort of see it's exactly the same situation as he did in the past with other people who were dissidents. He always uses people who have some kind of concern about their own society, and he works with them. He did it with Al-Shabaab, for goodness sake, with whom he has absolutely nothing in common. I mean, the idea that Isaias would, be close to a bunch of Islamists is just bizarre. I mean, there are lots of things I think about him, but that's not one of them. So, that's the sort of person he is. He will use the opportunities and he will manipulate them. I mean, he's been recently very much involved in the Sudan situation. There are all sorts of rumors about that are going on, which of them are true and which of them are not. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, one of the strategies that Isaias uses for scheming is training opposition groups or rebel groups. And one of the biggest unknowns today is whether or not he's actively involved in training and supporting the Fano group. But presumably, from what you're saying, it wouldn't surprise you if he was training them.
No, I mean, I presume that he is, and you know, they will find out what it's like to deal with somebody like that. I mean, they are. I mean, I suppose from their point of view, they feel that they don't have many options. You know, they don't have a good relationship with Abiy, it seems, any longer. His relationship with the Amhara seems to be very poor at the moment, and there are all sorts of stories of clashes and fighting and so forth and so on. And you know, Abiy, in a sense, is in a difficult position, I suppose, because you know he doesn't have the support of the Amhara anymore. If these reports are accurate, he has very limited support amongst the Oromo people. Who does that leave him with? You know, he's left then with I suppose, the group in the military that support him, and an urban elite who might support him. But even they must be very worried. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but yesterday the Fitch, the ratings agency, downgraded Ethiopia again. I mean, it's already junk bond status, which means that the pension funds, which control huge quantities of finance around the world, can't invest in Ethiopia. It's been downgraded again. It's just above, frankly, Fitch saying this country's going bust. It's not quite there, but it's pretty close. You know, which means that the people of Ethiopia, for every birr, for every dollar that they borrow, are paying higher and higher and higher interest rates, because the international investors know there's not much chance of them getting their money back, so they want it fast. Now that's tragic, absolutely tragic. And you know, I don't know whether the Chinese link their repayments to the international interest rates, or whether they give soft loans to Ethiopia. But you know, even the large loans that have been taken out with the Chinese, you know, to pay for things like the railway upgrading, and this, for goodness sake, this massive palace that Abiy is building. I mean, which nobody seems to even, I can't even find a picture of the blooming thing on the internet, but I mean, everybody knows it's being built. You know, what's that going to cost? And it's going to cost generations. And for what? I mean, this is no way to run a country.
Well, I think that the palace is incomprehensible, but one of the strange things about that is that Abiy can't understand why people wouldn't see the point, whatever the point is from his point of view. But you mentioned why Abiy would want another war now, when Ethiopia is in doldrums, really, from economic point of view and other aspects. And I was reading an article on The Economist, something that you will have read, I'm sure, published yesterday, I believe. And one source that The Economist cites told them, is a government official actually, the reason Abiy wanted war might actually be precisely that he wants some sort of diversion from the difficulty that he's facing in Ethiopia. So that could be one of the reasons. I would like to know what you think the Abiy's calculation might be. And the Economist also had spoken to a diplomat, and the diplomat said that Abiy had actually always spoken about port access and about war with Eritrea. He had always been waiting for the right time, and that he thinks now is the right time. But I would like to know what you think Abiy's calculation might be. I know that you touched it on it a little bit, but maybe you could expand on the points that you raised.
Well, there are just two things that I think one can point to. One is the fact that, according to a Twitter source, which is usually pretty good, that monitors the flight patterns of flights coming into Ethiopia and into other places, it said that there were three very large transport planes came in to the Ethiopia's Air Force base in Addis. The name, I can't remember the name of the base, but and that they arrived there today. Now, you don't send transport planes from the UAE to an Air Force base for fun. What are they carrying? One could assume that there are military equipment, and that was the way in which the drones that were played such an enormous role in the Tigray war were produced and then brought to Ethiopia, and that was where they also had technicians. There were Turkish technicians, you may remember, were on the base, and were organizing to get them working and instructing people on how to make them work. So if that is accurate, then it looks as if the preparations are underway for something. Now, will that be for use in the Amhara region? Maybe. Or would they be used for a war against Isaias? I don't know. The other thing, the point that you made about that this might be a good time for Abiy to do it, because he is under such pressure from other things. There's one story which comes from the Soviet Union, from Stalin's time, which was that it's a story of a remote community in the middle of, I don't know, in the middle of the Soviet Union, where all of a sudden the electrician is arrested and taken away to a camp by the security police. And everybody says, my goodness, who thought it? Everybody thought that he was a good communist, that he always went to the party meetings. Nobody ever heard him say a word against Stalin. How is this possible? It turned out many, many years later that Stalin had simply instructed that a list be produced of all engineers, and every 40th engineer should be arrested just to disrupt people. I mean, it's just a stratagem. And, I'm afraid leaders come to use these kind of strategies as ways of disrupting the opposition and trying to make things difficult for them. I mean, here we have a saying in Britain called the dead cat strategy. When things are really going badly, you suddenly produce a dead cat and you chuck it onto the discussion table. It's not for any particular reason, but everybody says, "Oh my goodness, look at that dead cat." They stop talking about what it is that they're worrying about. So I think that might be the thing. But you can't be sure. Maybe maybe Abiy's been advised by his generals that the Eritrean army is weak, and that if one was going to push to the sea, this is a good time to do it. We'll see. I'm not in a position to make that judgment.
Well, that is from Abiy's point of view, Martin. But from the Eritrean side, it looks like that something approaching paranoia or maybe justified worry has set in. Now all the Eritrea-based media outlets, Twitter accounts and YouTube-based channels, even those channels and Twitter accounts who were on the whole supportive of Abiy until very recently have now turned around, and they are busy saying that Abiy is preparing for war and that Eritrea should prepare, and all that sort of stuff. Are the Eritreans justified to be worried?
In a word, yes, because he is such a mercurial kind of person. You can't be sure where he's going, and he is capable of pretty irrational actions. So yes, I think that they are right. And I mean, there have been rumors, there have been reports of the Eritreans strengthening their troop presence along the border. They certainly haven't reduced their conscription, what they call national service, and nobody's been released. So it looks as if they are getting ready. There have been pictures I've seen of the Eritreans showing just how many tanks they have, large numbers of tanks, and putting them sort of through their paces and parading them. Now, you don't do that just for fun. I mean, it's quite expensive to do those kind of things. And, I don't think that Eritrea has infinite quantities of petrol and spare parts, which are required to do those kind of exercises.
And then you have the TPLF, of course, sort of stuck in Matadam, sort of shunted away, not really central player now in developments in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Today is the first anniversary of the Pretoria Agreement. As you know, not much has changed in terms of implementing the agreement. Western Tigray remains occupied. People haven't returned to their homes. The guns have been silenced. That is true, but that is about the only thing that you could say has happened in terms of positive things. So how does the TPLF or the Tigray administration, or whatever we want to call it, navigate these very, very murky waters now between Ethiopia and Eritrea? Do they keep quiet and just lay things pan out, or do they play an active role? I think there's some sort of confusion about that from the Tigray side. What do you think?
Well, clearly one of the things that was really distinctive about the war was the way in which the Tigrayan people came in behind the government and behind the party. And even the opposition parties were completely united in supporting the war effort. And that never cracked, even after, frankly, I thought strange decisions like, going all the way south until they were, people were flying out of Addis, and then all of a sudden turning back and coming, back over the mountains, which they'd won at such incredible cost. So, I mean, that was but nobody came out and said, well, this was crazy. There was complete unity behind the strategy, and if it hadn't been for that, for sure, the region would have been overrun. I mean, it was only the extraordinary heroism, quite frankly, of your troops and of your people, and their determination to fight, which prevented Mekelle being lost a second time. And I can imagine what it cost. I mean, I'd hate to think. But, that in a sense, that unity just isn't there anymore. I'm not saying that people are in revolt, but, there have been, a couple of marches into the town by the veterans. There are concerns about the wounded. The opposition parties are now questioning how things are going. There are even concerns inside the TPLF about how policy is being made. And there was these strange, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, there was a strange situation where, there were suggestions that a meeting hadn't been properly held or properly constituted, and all these kind of things, which, I mean, all it shows you is that there is concern and, a general ferment of unrest and unease about the situation. Now, at the same time, of course, you have three other things. Firstly, you have the burial of or the recognition of who has died, and the very, very painful services that have been held, and thousands of people have attended those. And I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like for families and fathers and brothers and sisters to have to go through that. The second thing is that you have the fact that a lot of people have still not been demobilized, probably because, I mean, this is an assumption on my part, but because the leadership is concerned that the threat still remains, particularly from the Eritreans, but could be from other groups, could be from the Amhara, the Fano. Who can even rely on the Ethiopian National Defense Force who are supposed to be providing the security for your borders, wherever those are. Because I mean, I still don't even. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe you know, but I don't even know where Tigray's borders are anymore. Because is it the borders as per the constitution, or isn't it? And I don't know. I mean, it's so difficult to disentangle where anything is. So that's the second one. The third one, of course, is, and again, you'd know much more about this than I will, which is the drought, the failure of crops, the poor harvests because of the lack of fertilizer and things. So it's an extremely difficult position for the people and for the leadership, and I think it is immensely hard to respond to this in a way that will look to the future and produce a better situation for everybody.
Well, you say that I might know more, but actually I don't, because there is such a dearth of information coming out of Tigray. I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of places in Western Tigray remain occupied by Eritrean forces, and Eastern Tigray, Europe, I think almost the entirety of Europe. And we are told that about 56 waradas, or maybe districts, let's say, continue to be occupied, and the US aid and WFP have suspended humanitarian supplies in Tigray. And because there haven't been any harvests for the past 2 or 3 years, you could imagine the enormity of the suffering in Tigray that must be unfolding. But it's in some sense it's guesswork, because there is no reliable information coming out. But thank you for laying out the position, the difficulties that the Tigray administration is in, the thinking or calculations that must be happening in Addis and in Asmara. And I think the other sort of entity in this equation is the international community. I know that the international community's attention has been now diverted away to the Middle East, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So nobody's paying attention to what is happening. I know that the US issued a statement yesterday saying that Ethiopia should refrain from provocative statements and stuff like that. But how do you think generally the international community should view the tension that is developing between Ethiopia and Eritrea?
Well, I'm sure that they are concerned about it. The last thing that they want is another conflict on their hands. They have enough to deal with in the Middle East, and of course Ukraine is another huge issue. I mean, it's just as interesting to note that the United States, at the moment, the President Biden can't get his any aid through Congress because for Ukraine. So you can see how he sees that as absolutely central to his international strategy, and if he can't do that, well, then you can imagine his time for concern and investment in the Horn of Africa must be pretty low. I would have thought. So yes, there is concern, and the American statement was also interesting because they once again said that the Eritreans had to leave. But of course, one of the things one has to be careful about when you talk about Irob is that it depends where you think the border is, because let's not forget that the Boundary Commission did redraw the border, and parts of Irob are in Eritrea legally. Now, are there enough? Is that the area where the concern is, or is it not? I don't know. So it's very complicated and difficult to make a judgment about those things. But there is genuinely a problem there, as there is in the other areas. But the overall, I think that the situation is extremely concerning. And I think that there's one thing about Abiy is that when he doesn't feel that that an area is a really pressing need for him, he just lets it. He stops worrying about it. He just lets it go. And I think that that is possibly what the problem for Tigray now is, that, yeah, hey, he doesn't care if the people are having a hard time, and he probably thinks they're justified in that's what they deserve. So the problem is, if I was sitting in Getachew Reda's shoes, or at his desk, I would be scratching my head thinking, what on earth can I do to try and get back to the center of attention of the leadership in Addis, so that they will take seriously the position of my people and my region.
Oh yeah, and the internal pointless wrangling in Mekelle doesn't help. I think they are occupied by those pretty petty infighting, but that's for them. I think you are right to raise the point about the boundary. Nobody knows where the boundary should be. My understanding is that following the Algiers agreement, some territories that are in Europe and in Tigray are supposed to go to Eritrea, but that there will be an official demarcation procedure. And actually that is one of the points of this agreement, like how should that be executed, right? That was one of the points of friction between Ethiopia and Eritrea following the agreement. And I think also the demarcation is conditioned on Eritrea paying compensation or something like that. So there is something.
I don't agree with you.
All right. So correct me, please.
Well, look, I'm not a boundary specialist. It's not my specialty. My understanding is that the Boundary Commission tried for years to get agreement from the Ethiopian government to allow the demarcation process to go ahead, and in the end, they just said, "Well, look, you're not allowing it to happen. It's blocked." And therefore, what we are simply going to say is, this is the boundary. It is in international law, as we said it was. These are the coordinates. How you do it is your problem. And they have washed their hands of it. I mean, it's not, nobody's engaged with it anymore. As far as the world is concerned, and as far as I understand, as far as law is concerned, the border exists. Now, whether it's been demarcated or not is a completely different question. And I don't think it has anything to do with paying reparations. I mean, there were reparations, I completely agree, which were awarded on both sides, and both sides said, I don't know where that ended up. I'm not sure a penny ever changed hands. But I think that is a closed book, and a great pity that it was allowed to end up in this position, because it allowed I mean, look, believe you me, I don't agree with Isaias very often, but he was absolutely right in a sense that Meles agreed to the process, agreed to the terms, and when the terms came out and he lost Badme, he didn't like it, and he wouldn't go along with it. Now, maybe he couldn't, maybe the political arithmetic was such that it could not be, he couldn't get it through Parliament, couldn't get it through the party. I don't know. But he would not go along with it. And there are letters from the UN Secretary General, very strong letters saying, pointing the finger at Ethiopia. And in a sense, this was the one occasion when Isaias said to the international community, you were the witnesses at Algiers, why aren't you acting? And then the Americans and the others said, well, yes, we were witnesses, but we weren't guarantors. And Isaias said, oh, for goodness sake. And so he holds that he was let down by the international community when he asked for justice. And don't forget, when there was a similar dispute over the Hanish Islands between Yemen and Eritrea, Eritrea had a fight with the Yemenis. They occupied some of the territory. Eventually, they were persuaded to go to arbitration. Eritrea lost every blooming island that they practically in the whole of the Red Sea in that area, and they agreed and stuck to it. So, in that sense, I have to say the Eritreans were right and Ethiopia was wrong. And I mean, that's my impression. You know, as I say, I'm not a jurist, I'm not a border specialist, or a geographer, but you know, having followed this for years, I think that is the case. So there are parts of Irob which, although the people are deeply opposed to being part of Eritrea, as I understand it, that they are legally in Eritrea. Now, one of the other things, of course, that the Boundary Commission said right from the beginning is, look, you set the terms of and the conditions of deciding where the border was, how we should decide the border. You said it should be ex aequo et bono. In other words, that it should only regard to law and not to fairness or justice. Just go by the law, go by the colonial treaties and the customary practices. And that's what we did. And if it went through at village, that's where we drew it, because that was what you asked us to do. You sure you want that? And they said yes. And the Boundary Commission said to both sides, look, at any time you can sit down and agree that the boundary goes somewhere else. It's entirely up to you. But nobody ever did. So I'm afraid it was a if I might say so, you know, people in the Horn of Africa of all persuasions can be extremely stubborn. I mean,
yeah.
Stubborn, let's be honest. But you know, boy, it was not a good decision, I don't think.
Oh, well, yeah. I think stubbornness is a national sport in Ethiopia and Eritrea. But
it also
thank you
wins
for
you
adding
marathons,
the.
if I might say so.
What did you say, Martin? I didn't hear you.
It also wins you marathons.
Oh, it does. Absolutely, it does. But thank you for adding the details in terms of the border and demarcation. I think I was trying to speak from memory, and obviously it was going to be misleading, what I was going to say. And of course, what happened in 2018 was that Abiy said he wasn't going to get in the way of the border demarcation. But now, since Abiy seems to be reneging on a lot of promises, and also Isaias seems to be reneging on a lot of promises, we don't know what they are going to do with the borders. Abiy might as well walk back on the promise that he made in 2018. So there's a lot of unknowns there. So in terms of the relationship that you have written about extensively in the book between Eritrea and Isaias and Abiy, actually it's wrong to say between Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was more between the two of them. Do you think they would try to repair it, or is it broken beyond repair?
You know, predicting the future, I hate doing it. I've been wrong.
I know I know I shouldn't be asking you that, but it's such a tempting thing to do.
I don't think any relationships are broken beyond repair. I mean, I don't know if you know, but there was a very old saying. Sorry to go back to British sayings, but it's what I know, which said that Britain has no permanent friends; it has permanent interests. And you know, that is the reality of the situation. In the end, people will go with the interests of their nation. I mean, sometimes they perceive them badly, and sometimes they you know, betray their nations. I mean, it has been known, but mostly people go along with what is, you know, the interest of their nation. And so I would, you know, and can put aside their personal feelings if that's the best thing to do in times of stress. But then the other thing, of course, is, you know, that both sides, both Ethiopia and Eritrea, are not, you know, single players. They exist in an international system, and in that sense, it's always open to people like the Saudis, the UAE, less so the Americans, although the Americans have worked at this for years and years and years, to try to, you know, find ways of bringing them together to stop this from happening. And I presume that the embassies are talking to each other and trying to use what they call good offices to make sure that a war doesn't take place, but will they succeed? Who knows? So yeah, it's certainly possible they could be brought together and the fences could be mended. After all, not one shot has been fired yet, so let's hope that continues.
Yeah, no shot has been fired yet, but the cargo flights that you just mentioned worry me a little bit. It looks like there's something in the something happening, something ominous might be coming. But Martin, you mentioned your time in Eritrea. You said that you have been to Eritrea a couple of times, and that you spoke to Isaias, and from the thing that you write, I could see that you have very deep connection with the country, with the people, with the culture. And it's obvious to see that you long for the day when there will be a semblance of freedom in Eritrea, and you do write those sentiments that you have for the country. What do you feel about the reaction that you get from supporters of Isaias who are less than complimentary about what he say?
They hate me, and that's fine. I mean, I really don't mind. People have become incredibly insulting, and I mean, who cares? I don't want to say that I'm not affected by it, but it really it doesn't I'm sitting in London, for goodness sake. If I was sitting in Asmara, I would be probably end up in some blooming jail, made out of a shipping container. I don't know. But people can be as insulting as they like. That's their prerogative. I mean, if you think that I can be, that my mind can be changed just because you tell me that I'm, a stooge of the CIA or in the pockets of this or that, or really, that I have, it doesn't affect me in the slightest. But I mean, that's life. People can say all sorts of things about you.
Yeah, and I think it's more than compensated by well, I mean, first of all, because it's such a honorable thing to do. So whether people reacted negatively or positively, I think it wouldn't matter. But also, a lot of people do recognize and appreciate the work that you do, and I think it's more than compensated by that, I would say. But I think it's interesting, Eritrea. I don't want to take you into political matters in Eritrea, but where do you or how do you see change coming? I ask you that because you are one of the few people who is really informed about the country, who know the dynamic of the country, who know the historical background. And again, I'm not asking you to predict the future, so please don't think that that's what I'm doing. But where do you see that the much needed change coming?
Well, yes, I mean, I think that the one thing is that the change will come. I mean, we know that is absolutely for sure. What one can't be sure is how it will come and whether things will be better or worse and when it will happen. So, but change always comes. So that of that there's no doubt. But where is it likely to come from? Well, I mean, one of the interesting and really things that had happened in the last, say, year is that until a year ago, Isaias really had the majority support in the diaspora, in the Eritrean diaspora, who are influential because maybe a third of all Eritreans now live outside of the country. I mean, nobody knows, since there hasn't been a census. Nobody knows even how many Eritreans there are inside Eritrea. But let's say it's something like a third of Eritreans live outside, a lot of them in Sudan, but many of them in places like the UAE, Europe, or America. So their attitude does matter, and it also matters because Isaias relies for perhaps a third of all of his financing on the Eritrean diaspora sending money home. So it's very important to him that the money keeps flowing and that the support keeps flowing, which is why he exercises such huge amounts of energy through his security forces, both in the region and across the world. People are spied on. They are pressurized. They can be beaten up if necessary. But in the last year, people have fought back, and particularly young Eritreans just aren't taking it lying down anymore. There's, Brigade Nahamadu who are standing up to him. And some of the measures they've taken have been pretty dramatic. I mean, they've broken up meetings. Now, is that a good idea? Some of the meetings were perfectly well, properly constituted. But, they argue, and I think they're right, that these are means of extracting support and putting pressure on the diaspora to fall into line. But the younger people, a lot of them are just not taking it anymore. Now, that is a huge change. Now, will they be able to then bring that home, so to speak? Will they be able to find a means of organizing in the region so that they can then put pressure of some description on Isaias? That I don't know. And, I just have no idea. Now, the other thing one should say is that I think it was 2013, there was from nowhere, there was all of a sudden a brigade of tanks arrived on the outskirts of Asmara. Nobody predicted that. And that is probably the most likely way that things would happen. From in the middle of nowhere, from out of nothing, all of a sudden, a colonel, a general, somebody would decide that he just could not stand seeing his own family being killed, his nation ruined, and he would take his troops and deal with the SARS. Now, on that occasion, they stopped and negotiated, and frankly were betrayed. And they paid a terrible price for it. But one day, either something like that will happen, or President Isaias will meet his maker through the normal process of aging, which, frankly, well, I'm closer to doing that position than you are, but I promise you we all get there. So, something will happen. Now, the great difficulty for the Eritrean people is that they have spent such a long time under one leader. I mean, he has really run the show for years before, 1991 and the taking over Asmara, and he's run it ever since 1991. And although he in the early days had some challenge from his colleagues, he certainly doesn't anymore. He's eliminated it. I mean, they are dead or living in prisons, and there's not a murmur. But at the same time, I do hear that people sit in cafes and they talk, and there are more discussions, and people sort of sit there and think, well, why don't we have proper electricity supplies in Asmara? Why don't we have proper water supplies in Asmara when we have an army the size of, I don't know, Belgium or something, with all this modern equipment? What's the point of it? And it hasn't achieved anything, absolutely nothing. And Isaias's constant ramping up of the suggestions that Eritrea is under threat are just nonsense. I mean, who on earth is going to try to attack Eritrea? I don't think. I just think it's nonsensical, and it would be far better to have concentrated those efforts and energies in the way that, say, Rwanda has, and in developing the country. I mean, I have lots of criticisms of the Rwandan government, and the way they treat their opposition. But boy, look at the development they've had. I mean, it's a really amazingly well developed country, and is doing well, and it has international respect, which is more than you can say for Eritrea.
Well, the view that people in Ethiopia have of Rwanda is wholly positive. But I was reading a book by, I think it's Michelle Arong, maybe her name, and
I know her very well.
Pretty depressing details, but that's a completely different topic. In terms of Eritrea, I was actually reading that it has a 300,000 strong army, and that's staggering for a country, for a small country to have that big of an army is something that really shocks you. But one thing that you mentioned about Isaias, I don't want to be ageist, but one aspect of Isaias is that he lives and plans as though he will be alive for another 100 years, which in one sense is positive. Actually, I like that. And one worry that I hear people mention is the new threat from Abiy might actually benefit Isaias. Now, he might say, well, we have a big threat, we have a war coming, and that might help him rally the people around him, including the Brigade Hamadu, brigade that you mentioned. They might switch sides and say, well, we have a bigger threat from Ethiopia and we're going to support our country now. And actually, that has been the trick that Isaias has been using for 30 years. The reason it has been easy for him to defer and postpone everything is by saying we have a big enemy, and he might do that now. So there is that worry and fear, and I don't know what you view on that might be. And with that, we're going to finish.
Well, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. He would use anything. That has been, as I said earlier, the one thing he does is to find people who are dissidents and arms them, trains them, sends them back to carry out attacks and disrupt his enemies. And the other thing he does is to whip up his own population by saying, "Whoa, there's this big threat. You've got to stick with me because otherwise you will be our independence and our nation will be under threat." And he does both of those things, and he's done it. It's a game he's been playing for years and years and years. As a result, his country is in a mess, and the impact that he has had on the Horn in general has been extremely negative. And I'm afraid that is still the case. He is still one of the most negative impacts on the region and on his people, and not I think where the people should be, because at the end of the day, I've been working on Ethiopian history a little bit in recent months. I'm actually writing a book on African slavery, and the one things that you have to be struck by when you do that is you see how long and deep Ethiopian history and culture is. It is amazing depth of history and of historic relationships with other people and with other cultures, going way back into the past. There's nothing new about Ethiopia being a sort of an international state. It has always been an international state and has had relations, whether it was with the Portuguese or even with the Chinese. It goes back a long way. Very interesting. So I have huge respect for the people of the region. But does it mean I like their leaders? No.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And that from me. But if you have a message actually directly to Abiy and Isaias, we could pretend that they are listening to this. And if you have something to say, please do that.
I would say, for goodness sake, let's not have another war. I think that is my biggest message. Let's not have another war. No more families having to mourn their dead and bury them, and with their bones the hopes of generations to come and the hopes of growth and prosperity.
Oh, thank you very much, Martin. That was such a pleasure. And that was Martin Plaut. And please do read his and Sarah Vaughan's book, Understanding Ethiopia's Tigray War. It's, I think, one of the best books written about the war. I'm going to put a link in the description, so please try to read that. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.